Hello, welcome back and welcome to Module 5. This module is a little bit different than the previous modules in that there's just one lesson in this module. When I was putting this together, everything was flowing really nicely since I'm covering the entire client onboarding process. So I didn't want to break it up and have interruptions in between. So instead of those different lessons, I've outlined focus areas for this module. So starting with the importance of onboarding and then going into the general sequence of events. And then I'll go more specifically into these events before covering the 90-day plan, kickoff call prep, reporting, and then scheduling out those 90-day plan items. For this module, what we're talking about in these items is what happens after you send out the client services agreement and your first invoice and you're ready to get started with working with the client. With that in mind, let's dive in. Before we get too deep into specifics, I wanted to start this module by talking about the importance of onboarding. So I personally put a huge emphasis on getting onboarding right. I find that it sets the tone for the entire client relationship moving forward. And after being in agencies for so many years and also being on the client side, I can tell you that nailing onboarding is a super important factor when it comes to retention and just having a smooth and successful client relationship. Having a really solid onboarding also showcases your professionalism and sets you apart from other freelancers who might just be winging it. So with that in mind, it's important for me to have a uniform process. It ensures that every new client gets the same onboarding experience, and it also streamlines my activities. There's so much going on when I first start with a new client that I really don't want to put additional brain power to figuring out what my next step is. It's already outlined in a process. I just go from one step to another. So with that in mind, let's talk about the general process or sequence of events. So I've outlined here all of the steps that I take for every new client that I work with. I'll go more in depth into each of these events, but generally it goes where I send the welcome email first, and then I start getting access to accounts if I don't have them already. Then I'll go into creating the 90-day plan. We'll then have a kickoff meeting. I'll schedule out the 90-day plan items and the recurring management activities. I'll also send a welcome gift. We'll talk about that a little bit more. And then I'll go into setting up reporting, and I also keep the client updated throughout this entire process. Okay, let's dig in further. We'll start with the welcome email. I send this out once they've signed the client services agreement. And I like to do this so the client gets confirmation that yes, we are indeed working together and I am starting work after they sign. So it's nothing too fancy, but it does outline initial next steps and what to expect. And to help streamline this for you, I've included a welcome email template that you can edit and use for your own onboarding. So I'll pull that up right here. And this is located in the course resource section along with all of the other resources and templates. So you should see that in there. Like everything else, just make a copy so you can customize and fit to your voice and your activities that you'll be doing for your new client. So you'll notice it looks similar to the email that I showed you in the last module when I was talking about account access. So this is literally the exact template that I use. In this template, I let them know that I'm excited to get started. And then under next steps, I cover those account access items based on the channels that I'll be managing. If they've already granted me access, then I'll just leave that part out. And the hyperlinks that are included, those links go to that Notion template that I covered for the account access. I also scheduled a kickoff call in this email, again, like I mentioned in the last module, and then I'll cover any outstanding requests that I need ironed out before the kickoff. All right, now that we've covered the welcome email, let's move on to creating the 90-day plan. I always recommend a 90-day plan to help guide your initial activities when you're first getting started with a new client. And I do this for a couple of reasons. One, it lets the client know that you have a plan and a strategy. And two, it ensures consistency in how you're managing clients and the actual activities that you're doing. So you don't want to have one client where you really got it buttoned up and then another client where you're scrambling just to do the bare minimum. This makes sure that across all of your client portfolio, everybody's getting the same treatment and there's consistency across the board. So with that in mind, I have a phased approach for pretty much every client I onboard. And I even mentioned this in the discovery calls as well. So month 1 is research and build. Month 2 is all about optimizing and refining. Month 3 will go into scale and expand. So I make it clear, even in the discovery portion, that month 1 is going to be a lot of digging in deep and laying the foundation. And I mention this and prioritize this because there can be an inclination to want to, just hit the ground running, go, 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 see results immediately. I always like to caution prospects and clients when we're first getting started because the first month, I want to make sure we're doing it right. And so while it's not as sexy as seeing 100% growth month over month, I really want to make sure that these strategies are rooted in a really strong foundation so that we can build and refine upon them in month 2 and then scale and expand in month 3. And I also created a template for this part if you do decide to do a 90-day plan. But again, I highly recommend that you do. And I'll walk through the plan a little bit here in this lesson just so that you can get a feel for it. So obviously you'll want to remove the yellow box and the intro explanation before you send it out. And as I cruise on down, you'll notice that I've highlighted some things here in green. Those are all things that you'll need to edit and customize. But this is a really great way to get your initial strategy written out and in a format where the client can react to it and provide their feedback. It starts with general details like goals, budgets, objectives, and audience before going into the timeline portion. And in each section of the timeline, I have an objective, and then I also break down all of the activities that I'll be doing in each part. Again, customize this to your activities and make it so that this is essentially a swipe file that you can adjust instead of having to create a new 90-day plan every time you onboard a new client. And at this point, I have this so buttoned up that sending out the 90-day plan is one of the quickest and easiest parts of onboarding. And I like to have everything broken out pretty granularly because that helps me create tasks out of all of these and put them into Asana with set scheduled dates. And you'll notice here that the first month 1, is much, much longer than month 2, and that's by design. So I make it really clear with all of my clients that month 1 is the most time intensive in terms of researching and building. There's just a lot to do, a lot to set up. And so I want my 90-day plan to reflect that as well. And again, take out anything that doesn't make sense. Like if you're not going to be configuring their conversion tracking, for example, you can just take this whole part out. But this is just a nice framework to build off of so you don't have to start from scratch and, looking at a blank page when you go to create your 90-day plan. All right, so let's move to prepping for the kickoff call. Unlike the discovery call, I will use a slide deck for this meeting and all of the meetings to follow. So all of my recurrent client check-ins, I'll use slide decks for those as well. Especially during the kickoff call, there is a lot to cover. So I just want to make sure that my thoughts are organized and I've got my talking points so nothing falls through the cracks and I can make sure that I address everything that I need to. During the kickoff call, I'll cover any unanswered questions that I have that weren't covered in the discovery call or any emails going back and forth, especially as it pertains to budget, goals, or really anything else that I need to effectively get started with management. And I've also outlined my general agenda for the kickoff call. Again, it will vary just based on items that I already have solidified versus if there's any outstanding items. So while I do kind of have a process for this, I have to customize and edit quite a bit just based on what has already been talked about with the client. So I'll kick off with admin items. This is everything from getting super nitty gritty, like confirming the credit card on file and the ad accounts, confirming if they would prefer email or Slack for written communication. I also ask if they would feel comfortable adding me to their CRM. So oftentimes, if a client has a CRM, it's nice for me to be in there just so that I can make sure that 1, my lead tracking is correct, but 2, I have just more insight into how they're being serviced over time. And then I'll also talk about completed activities. And then the third item under getting started, that's where I'll ask about budget, goals, the CTAs that we're going to use, their ideal customer profile, and any other foundational elements that might not be nailed down yet, but are absolutely essential to running effective campaigns in the future. And then I'll present some research and findings that I have so far. Whether it's initial keyword research or audience research, I like to present some sort of analysis that has informed the 90-day plan. And then that leads beautifully into the 90-day plan review. So I'll keep it brief because I don't want to read off a 3-page document to the client, but I at least provide some highlights and talk about the objectives for each month. Next, I'll cover next steps and needs. So these are next steps on both my end and the client's end. And then lastly, I'll wrap up with scheduling the recurring check-in meetings. Like I mentioned in the last module, I want this scheduled while we are on the call. And I like doing recurring check-ins because it helps me ensure that my work is in line with the business goals, my contacts' goals, and I'm also meeting their expectations. So it's much easier to get feedback and also pick up on vibes when you're meeting with them versus just relying solely on email or Slack or any other form of written communication. And then after the kickoff call, I will immediately send a call recap with the 90-day plan attached as a PDF. And then I also outline next steps for both parties coming out of that meeting. I will immediately go to Asana and schedule out all of the items from the plan, along with the immediate next steps coming out of the kickoff call. So you can use whatever task management platform you want, but I do recommend getting one to at least organize all of your tasks, especially during onboarding, so that nothing slips through the cracks and you're not promising something to the client and then you're forgetting about it later. And then after that is done, I will send my client a welcome gift. It's not anything too fancy, it's just a nice gesture. I personally find it really fun. And this is completely optional, but I do find that obviously clients really like it because who wouldn't want a gift? I'll usually send a gift basket with snacks to the client's office. I tend not to choose anything with nuts in it, just in case somebody has a nut allergy, but you can just search online for client gift baskets and you'll get tons and tons and tons of results. There's so many to choose from. And again, it's just a really nice gesture. And once I've done that, I will go into setting up reporting and then just knocking out all of my 90-day plan activities. So I previously used a really simple week by week Google Sheet for my reporting, and that had standard metrics like costs, clicks, impressions, conversions, cost per lead, and conversion rate. They were shown for each channel or sometimes by campaign segment. And that works really well. I never got any complaints and nobody thought it was too rudimentary. But I personally wanted a more visually appealing dashboard solution. So I now use Reporting Ninja, but if you're just getting started and you just want to like whip up a simple report, a simple Google Sheets table is the way to go. If you want to add charts, you can. So either one works, but definitely prioritize reporting. It's a good way to help you better understand performance and what's going on week by week and month by month. And it's also really helpful for the client. And last note for this general sequence of events is that I will keep the client updated throughout the entire process. Because I like to be higher touch, especially during the beginning of a new client engagement, I'll send quick status update emails. And I'll also make them aware of any blockers even before our next call so that we can get those hurdles cleared. And with that, I have some action items as we wrap up this module/lesson. First up, write out your general onboarding process. You can either use mine or make adjustments based on your style, but at least have a process in play before you actually need it. And then next, check out the welcome email, make a copy and make it your own. And definitely save it somewhere so you can reference it the next time you onboard a client. I would recommend creating a Google Drive folder with all of your like onboarding templates, just so that you've got a central location and you don't have to hunt around in your Drive for all of these various templates and tools to use. Then do the same thing with the 90-day plan. And then if you haven't already, I would explore task management systems and try one out. There's free versions for most of them. Asana obviously comes to mind because that's the one that I use, but there's also Monday, I think Trello, you can use Notion. There's a lot to choose from. So just figure out what works best with how you work. And then lastly, think about how you want to report on client account performance and build yourself a template, whether it's in Google Sheets or Excel, Looker Studio, or a platform like Reporting Ninja. At least get some sort of reporting template in place before you actually need to implement it and start reporting. So get all of these onboarding templates and resources finalized before you actually need to, and I promise it will make everything so much easier. All right, we are nearing the end of this course, which is crazy. So we're heading into module 6 next, which is the last module with new information. So this upcoming module is all about running your freelance business. When you're ready, I will see you over there.